Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Jack Borman for the Locked On Wolves postcast is going to break down Wolves-Lakers. We're going to talk about the keys to the matchup, the biggest thing that stand out on both sides of the ball for us, plus predictions. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. And today on the show, a very special episode of Locked On Wolves. We have Jack Borman on. Of course, Jack is our analyst from the Locked On Wolves postcast and does an outstanding job breaking down each and every Timberwolves game immediately following on YouTube. We're going to talk through the matchup, our favorite matchups on both sides of the ball. We'll talk through how the Lakers may defend Ant, how the Wolves may defend Luka, what our trying to avoid the term X factor, but basically what our X factors are, what has to happen for each team to win the series. And we'll also give predictions toward the end of the show. So all of that is upcoming. First, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. No paywalls ever. You can watch on YouTube. You can listen wherever you get podcasts. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And also a reminder about the Locked On Wolves newsletter. You can subscribe at lockedondaily.com. And it's one stop for all things Wolves, all things NBA, delivered straight to your inbox. Some notes from myself, some Wolves notes from around the web, and some national articles as well. So subscribe at lockedondaily.com. You'll get that Monday through Friday. All right, let's dive in. Myself and Jack Borman. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Jack. All right, as promised, I have Jack Borman from the Locked On Wolves postcast. We actually did 3 postcasts just last week, filling in for Luke Inman. I was hosting, and Jack, of course, did the vast majority of the postcasts throughout the year. So if you haven't listened to the postcast, please do. You could go subscribe to it at Locked On Sports Minnesota, or subscribe to Locked On Sports Minnesota. And Jack and Luke Inman go live after every Wolves game, including the playoffs. And then that audio is right here on the Locked On Wolves audio feed after each and every Timberwolves game. So, Jack, appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Happy to join you.
So we're obviously talking Wolves-Lakers. Yesterday on the show, I did a crossover with the Kamenetsky brothers of Locked On Lakers and kind of dug into some, Lakers perspectives on the matchups and how the Lakers may handle Anthony Edwards, et cetera. So we may touch on, I want to get your thoughts on some of those things today. But I think a pretty good place to start for this matchup overall is obviously the headliners, Anthony Edwards, Luka Doncic, and we talked about this last week. I can't remember which postcast we kind of said, look, of the 4 teams the Wolves may or may not, are likely to play one of these 4, we kind of thought the Lakers were the worst matchup. And I think you said on the postcast, look, they've got 3 of the best 4 players in this series. I think that's the case. And I talked about that with the Locked On Lakers guys too. But given that, we don't know exactly who's going to guard who. We can kind of make some educated guesses based on what we've seen so far this year. But what's your favorite potential matchup on both sides of the ball? I guess it could be either when the Wolves are on offense or when the Lakers are on offense. There's going to be probably some cross matching. But what stands out to you is you're looking forward to watching these guys battle, head to head.
Yeah, I think for me, the first place that I go to immediately is Julius Randle against either LeBron or Rui Hachimura. And the reason for that is because I think, when you start to dive into some of the lineup data, this is probably the first year in LeBron's career that a team that he played for was worse with him on the floor than him off the floor.
Yeah.
And on the defensive end of the floor, especially, the Lakers defensive rating with LeBron on the floor, 117.1. Be 25th in the NBA this season, extrapolated for a whole season. With him off the floor, it's 109.1, which would be tied for second best in the NBA. And I think that, if you get Julius Randle matched up against LeBron James and you see how much the Timberwolves have started to put Julius Randle in actions, especially since Rudy Gobert got hurt with that back injury. He's been screening for Anthony Edwards a lot more. He's been a lot more involved up top in horns and in double drag as well, and then getting the ball out of that. So I think, if if that ends up being the case, LeBron guards LeBron guards Julius Randle. I think Julius Randle is going to have a super important role, not only as a scorer, but as a playmaker too, because if there's defensive lapses from LeBron, or, they try to make switches that aren't necessarily good for the Lakers, and you get smaller guys on Julius Randle, he's really, really good at taking advantage of those mismatches. And I just think that the more that Julius Randle is able to do by himself, whether that be draw on the defense and make kick out passes, or be able to score in isolation for himself, I think that the easier it's going to be for Anthony Edwards, and by extension the Timberwolves offense, just because we saw that, last season when Anthony Edwards wasn't really able to to be the primary scorer, or at least have an easy time scoring in that Western Conference Finals against the Mavericks, and they're putting 2 on the ball all the time. Like, you just need guys behind him to be able to go get buckets themselves, and Randall's ability to do that, get buckets for himself, but also create open shots for others, I think is going to be super important. So how the Wolves, attack that, whether it's, LeBron or Rui Hachimura, who Julius has been super successful in one-on-one matchups against over the last couple of seasons, is going to be super important for the Wolves.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned them putting 2 on the ball with Ant, and obviously, I think I saw the stat that Ant was blitzed more in pick and roll than any other player in the NBA this year, and to not great success, although I think he's certainly shown strides there, and teams have done it more and more often, especially with no Karl Anthony Towns this year. It's just something Ant has had to deal with. The Lakers, at least I didn't make it all the way through yet. The only Wolves Lakers game with Luka on the floor for LA, and the way that the Lakers are defending Ant, they started the game with Hachimura on Ant, and we're just kind of, trying to clog the gaps, essentially, like show bodies in the gaps. They didn't truly put 2 on the ball most of the time, but I wonder if that's something, like, I don't think Hachimura guarding Ant is sustainable for an entire game. I do think Jared Vanderbilt will get a playing time on Ant, but I'm curious to see how much they actually do try and put 2 on the ball against Anthony Edwards.
Yeah, and it's not something that they like to do. I mean, the Lakers have a really, really good shell concept on the defensive end of the floor, and their paint defense actually got better after they traded Anthony Davis, which is not something that you'd necessarily expect. And I think a really important part of that was, half the battle is keeping guys out of the paint, right? And then the other half of the battle is making those shots as difficult as possible once guys do get into the paint. And I think they've kind of flipped which one they're better at now without Anthony Davis, in that they're doing a much better job of just keeping guys out of the paint in general, which has been super important. And they've forced more and more jump shots, and because of that shell concept, and they keep more guys on the perimeter, they also do a pretty good job of not fouling and sending guys to the free throw line. So it'll be really interesting to see if Anthony Edwards can kind of force the Lakers to deviate from that. And the more that they kind of have to fly around in rotation, and the Wolves can play against, more of a spread defense, I think that'll certainly help a ton. And again, will be another situation where if, a guy like Julius Randle can make really good decisions off the catch against a spread floor, whether that's to score for himself or, make extra passes, is going to be super important.
Yeah, I do think, and in the conversation I had with Lockdown Lakers, we didn't get to Julius Randle till toward the end, and they basically asked, like, what is a successful series for Julius Randle look like for the Wolves? And I think Randle had some self-aware comments after the regular season finale about how he realizes, like, he doesn't. I'm paraphrasing massively here, but basically he realizes he doesn't need to score 30. He can contribute in other ways. And in my mind, in this matchup, especially if they end up putting 2 on Ant, or just really heavily shading the floor towards Anthony Edwards, Julius Randle has to be aggressive and decisive off the catch, especially if it's a tilted floor that's tilted the other direction, and if there's a mismatch. If he does get involved in some actions and there's a switch and he has a mismatch, he has to punish the mismatch. If it's not a mismatch and he's got Hachimura or somebody on him that has a little bit more size, can he score? Yes, but I think that's where you want to be careful with a Julius Randle isolation back down into a strong defense situation. But I do think as long as he's decisive, kind of that second side action when he gets a chance to attack against a defense that may be rotating a bit or a little bit mismatched, I mean, that is going to be a really, really big thing for the Wolves to generate some non-Ant at least non-Ant centric offense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and just looking at Hachimura specifically, I mean, the last, two regular seasons, in the direct matchups that they've had, Randle scored 20 points. He's 9 of 10 on 2-point shots, 4 assists, 0 turnovers, and drew 1 shooting foul in their direct matchup. Again, the matchup data is not perfect that the NBA provides, but I mean, it's pretty good snapshot for someone like Julius Randle, who plays in isolation quite a bit and is in these one-on-one situations. So again, I think if you can at least like get Ant a breather in a sense and be able to play a little bit through Randle, so Ant's not, having to do everything on every single possession is going to be super important. And I think the more you can get to some of those wedge actions and post up Randle on smaller guys too, I think that'll be really important, because I think if you can get any of these guys in the Lakers, their top 6-7 guys in rotation in foul trouble, I think it could just totally tilt the scales of an entire game. And Randle certainly is capable of doing that with his physicality.
Yeah, and that is that. I mean, you mentioned any sort of foul trouble for the Lakers, and in general, they're pretty good at not committing fouls as a team, or at least not allowing a ton of free throw attempts. But I mean, like we mentioned, the Lakers have 3 of the best 4 players in the series. I think you can make an argument the Wolves have 7 of the best 11 players in the series. Like there isn't much depth there, which of course matters less in the playoffs. It matters less in the first round when you have multiple off days between each game until the end of the series. So, but foul trouble is one area where that could matter, right? Like if guys do get into foul trouble, then depth matters even more. I do want to get into the non-Jackson Hayes minutes, the smaller Laker lineups, how the Wolves and by obviously part of that, Rudy handles that. So we're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, for instance, they can help connect you with a freelance expert who can deliver incredible results, has done it in the past, and will do it for you. Also, it's super fast and easy to hire. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, multiple qualified candidates will be there for you to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork, UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today. All right, so what are the kind of like casual, like super casual, surface level kind of analysis about this series that people will have? It just kind of around the NBA media sphere is that Rudy Gobert gets played off the floor of the playoffs, which I'm doing air quotes as I say it, and I hate it, and I hate that I bring it up. But like that's just a lazy way to say the Wolves are a big team. The Lakers like to play quote unquote small without Jackson Hayes on the floor. We all know their preferred lineup, at least over the past few months, has been with Dorian Finney-Smith and Rui Hachimura, and no true big on the floor, no Jackson Hayes on the floor. Even though he starts, he plays 20-ish plus or minus minutes. I think that and the Rudy getting played off the floor thing they're not the same thing, but it is true that the Lakers play without Jackson Hayes to pretty great success, and I think it's pretty likely they're going to do that against the Wolves. We have not seen the Lakers with Luka and the Wolves with Rudy at the same time. Rudy Gobert missed the one game the Lakers had Luka at the end of February. So there's obviously there's a lot of unknowns here. My hunch is that the Lakers do what the Lakers do, which is they'll start Jackson Hayes, they'll pull him after a few minutes, and then they'll play small for most of the rest of the first half. And the Wolves will just do what the Wolves do, which is continue to play big. And then I think Chris Finch makes adjustments based on how things go. And maybe in crunch time, that means, maybe it is Naz Reid that's closing at center if the Wolves are behind and they need offense or whatever. And if the Wolves are ahead and things are going okay, then maybe Gobert stays on the floor. But I'm curious to see, I'm curious to get your take on, how do you think that's handled? Do the Lakers just play Jackson Hayes way less? Or is this just kind of one of those adjustments that both coaching staffs have to make, in the playoffs, adjusting to what's happening? Are we going to play our bigs, our center more? Are we going to play them less? Are we going to adjust in crunch time? what is this kind of small ball versus this Rudy Gobert led Timberwolves defensive unit? What does that look like in your mind?
Yeah, I think for me, it starts with the Lakers, and I think that JJ Redick is much more willing to pivot off of Jackson Hayes pretty quickly compared to Chris Finch, and I think you want to look at the just looking strictly in the fourth quarter. So this is a somewhat small sample size, but across 9, this is since Luka was acquired by the Lakers. I mean, that lineup that you talked about, their small ball 5 lineup is plus 22.5 net in 37 minutes across 9 games in the fourth quarter. That's pretty remarkable how good that lineup is. And then you want to look at the Wolves base starting lineup, right? Because I think it matters a little bit less at the start of games and matters a little bit more about what you're going to do at the end of games. And in the Timberwolves, their most common fourth quarter lineup is their starting 5 in the fourth quarter. And it is minus 29.3. It is their worst starting, or is their worst lineup that has played at least 20 minutes together in the fourth quarter. And if you say, okay, well, is Mike how much of that is Mike Conley?
Yeah.
They're minus 11 with Dante DiVincenzo in there for Mike, and they're a plus 5 with Nikhil in there for Mike. And the Timberwolves' best fourth quarter lineup has actually, largely been that lineup that we see start the fourth quarter, which is the 3 guards. So Mike, Dante, Nikhil, and then Naz and Rudy. But outside of that, a lot of the Timberwolves' best lineups have been their smaller lineups where they have, that front court of, Jaden, Julius, and Naz, and then Ant at the 2, and then either Nikhil or Dante at the 1. Both of those lineups have been wildly successful for the Timberwolves this season in fourth quarter lineup. So I think that is something that we'll see if the Timberwolves end up needing offense, because I think, again, Chris Finch is a creature of habit in that, and a creature of trust in that I think Rudy has built up such a level of trust with Chris Finch and showed it in the playoffs last season in super important moments for the Timberwolves, especially in those first 2 series. I mean, everyone thought in that Sun series, everyone under the sun thought that Rudy Gobert was going to get played off the floor. There wasn't a single person in the national media that said, yeah, I think Rudy Gobert is going to make life really, really difficult, and this Timberwolves team is going to totally impose their will as the bigger team against a smaller team that likes to play mostly 4 round 1, but in a lot of cases 5 out with Durant at the 5.
Yeah, he played Durant played center for a huge chunk of that series.
Yeah, so I think for me it really depends on how easily the Timberwolves can generate offense with Gobert out there. I think if you can have Julius Randle setting more of the screens, play Rudy Gobert in the dunker spot, so that if the Lakers are going to switch 1 through 5 in those moments in the fourth quarter, where Ant and Julius in the 2-man game up top can create mismatches or advantages for one another, and then you get that 2-on-1 downhill game where Rudy's in the dunker ready to roll, like we've seen a lot the last 2-3 weeks that we've talked about on the postcast, then I think the Timberwolves could be in good shape. But I think that JJ Redick is really going to lean into their small ball identity and just really force the Timberwolves to make a decision of, do you want to try to choose offense or defense, and kind of force them into some indecision as to which lane they want to go down. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think playing small, like, again, us saying the Wolves playing small isn't saying Rudy's getting played off the floor necessarily. It's just it's going to depend on what the offense looks like for Minnesota, I think, more than what the defense looks like for Minnesota. They're such a bad transition defense, and the smaller the Wolves play, the better in theory they should be at running, and they don't have to worry about Rudy. And the Wolves obviously don't run a lot. In fact, the Lakers actually have a higher frequency of running in transition than the Wolves do on the year. But the Lakers' transition defense is one of the worst in the league. It's been kind of bottom third all season. And so if the Wolves are opportunistic with when they're running and kind of pick their spots, especially if they're playing small, it's something I talked about the Locked On Lakers guys, is if the Wolves are, maybe we talk about this, we could talk about this too, but like, I don't think the Wolves are going to consistently double Luka Doncic, but maybe they pick their spots and double Austin Reeves or double LeBron James, but probably less likely, but like picking their spots to try and force some turnovers that way and get, some opportunities going back the other direction. And also if Rudy's not on the floor, perhaps they try a little bit more of that trapping because they're a little bit more mobile, a little bit more, there's some more switchability out there. And then you're better in transition as well. I think there could be something there as long as they're kind of judicious with when they're trying to do that. But I think that's a way they can steal some relatively easy offensive possessions as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think we saw it a bunch too when Rudy Gobert was down, that especially when you had Julius Randle and Reid in there. I mean, both those guys are really, really good, and Jaden for that matter. I mean, all three of those guys in your front court are really, really good at grabbing it and going and making those hit-ahead passes in transition. And I'm sure that's going to be a point of emphasis for the Timberwolves. And I'll get into it, in a little bit, just in terms of what I think, one thing the Wolves need to do to win the series. But trying to manufacture any easy offense that you can is going to be super important when you're going against an offense that's got three guys that can give you 30 in a heartbeat on any given night, can catch fire, are all super smart, can manipulate matchups however they want, and get to really whatever spot on the floor they want to as well. So that's going to be important for me as well. And then I think the other thing for me too that I'm kind of interested in is, where does Jaden McDaniels find himself on the floor? Yeah. Especially if, they want to play more of that style of defense that they did against the Nuggets last year, where you put Rudy on maybe a 3-point shooter you're okay with leaving open. And then, so whether that's Jared Vanderbilt and then having, Jaden McDaniels kind of roaming around down in the paint, I think that could be something that would be interesting to me as well, especially if you also have someone like Nickeil Alexander-Walker or Jalen Clark or maybe even Reid at times taking the Luka or Julius Randle taking the Luka Doncic assignment just to throw something a little bit different at the Lakers to try to junk it up and throw some different looks out there with putting defensive playmakers in different spots on the floor that makes it a little bit more difficult for the Lakers to try to get everyone in try to get everyone moving off the ball and getting the defense in rotation. I think those types of defensive assignments may also kind of stagnate the Lakers a little bit and force them to match up hunt a little bit. And I think that's kind of when the Lakers offense can get bogged down a little bit, is when they get so, laser focused on trying to hunt a specific matchup or attack a certain guy on the floor. And I think, if that can happen, and then the Timberwolves can hold up one-on-one, and they've got plenty of high level, good caliber defenders to be able to do that in certain situations, then it could be an interesting factor that ends up tilting the Timberwolves away. But the good news is the Timberwolves are a really balanced team, and they have been for the majority of the year, and they can do a lot of different things on both sides of the ball. And so I think the ball is really kind of in Chris Finch's court in terms of how quickly does he want to try to get creative versus trying to lean on what he's done all year, which, to his credit, has been, largely successful in the aggregate, but has also led to some, pretty head scratching losses too. So the margin for error is just pretty thin.
Yeah. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but you mentioned how the Wolves, you mentioned somewhere about Luka on offense, and I just want to get your take. I spent a lot of time the last couple of days on this, but I mean, the Luka assignment, you go back and watch the one Lakers game where he faced the Wolves, and that was the game where there was Dante DiVincenzo. I think it was his first game back. It was a minutes limit. There was no Rudy. There was no Julius Randle. And the Timberwolves put Jalen Clark started that game. And so Jalen Clark was the primary defender against Luka and did a pretty good job, got into a little bit of foul trouble early, got drawn into the web a couple of times. But overall, I thought was pretty good given the size difference there. What do you think the Wolves come out of the gate with for Luka? Is it Jaden McDaniels straight up? I tend to think it's him until he's in foul trouble, and then it might be maybe even Ant. You mentioned Julius Randle. Nas got a crack last year in the playoffs against Luka. I don't think they're going to consistently double him, as I mentioned earlier. But what do you think? Like the initial strategy, at least, is going to be to try and defend Luka Doncic.
Yeah, I think for me, it's going to be McDaniels. I don't see a situation in which Chris Finch would risk getting Anthony Edwards in foul trouble right away off the gate to start the series like that, especially considering that you've got Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jalen Clark both waiting on the bench if McDaniels does get into foul trouble. And the same thing I think goes for Julius Randle. I think he's too important to what they want to try to do offensively, where I just don't think Chris Finch is going to risk that. I think more of that experimentation will come into play, over the course of a game. If you're trying to get to a certain lineup and you need to steal a minute or two here and there, and you want to put Jalen Clark in the game, or you want to try to, maybe even go to, someone like TJ Shannon, see if he can, just kind of, poke at Doncic and just kind of be annoying for Luka to deal with for 3 or 4 possessions here or there, because that's the type of thing that is really important in these playoff series. So, yeah, I would say that it'd be a pretty stock standard alignment, at least when it comes to Luka. But I think with Austin Reeves, that's a better question of how much does Chris Finch trust Mike Conley versus does he just abandon that completely from the jump and start Nickeil Alexander-Walker so that the Wolves maybe can switch a little bit more. So that'll just be what I'm watching for, but I would expect Chris Finch to be forced off of his guys, if you will, and Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert.
Yeah, I think Mike Conley's going to have a shorter, I mean, he has had a short leash in the last several weeks, and I think that's probably going to be the case again. I do think, to your point about Jalen Clark, TJ Shannon, that's something that I've wished that, I wasn't on the early in the season clamoring for just play the young guys, because I think that gets overdone. There's so many other factors, but stealing possessions here and there is super important. And what's the worst thing that TJ Shannon's going to do on offense over the course of a few possessions? He's going to play hard defensively if you give him that assignment, and somebody like him or Jalen Clark is going to really annoy Luka Doncic. So it's not like it's a little different than playing Rob Dillingham, who has the ability to, with the ball in his hands a lot, tank some offensive possessions. But if you're just trying to be physical and frustrate Luka and get under his skin a little bit, which we've seen has happened to him, especially recently, it's really always been the case for Luka that's you can do that. Why not steal? We've seen Jalen Clark play at the end of the first quarter quite a bit recently, and that's been kind of his primary stint. But can that get extended? Do the Wolves just throw waves of different fresh bodies at Luka and try and annoy him? I think that's certainly a viable strategy. I want to get into basically just saying, hey, if the Wolves win this series, what happened? What went really right for them? And also vice versa for the Lakers as well. We'll do that next year to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you'll realize just how much you spend on undoubtedly something random like food delivery, for instance, or coffee. Now, with Monarch Money, instead, you can budget smarter and you can save more. And also, instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals all in one place. It's super convenient. You can also manage money with your partner. It'll be smoother than anything you've ever done before to manage money. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right, I want to close by basically taking a step back and saying, look, if we fast forward a couple of weeks and the Wolves won the series, what went right for Minnesota? It could be Anthony Edwards just going bonkers. It could be, Julius Randle flipping the narrative on its ear for what he's done in the playoffs in the past, or it could be something that's very a stat category, like the Wolves did this to the Lakers. They completely crushed them on the offensive glass, or whatever. If we're sitting here in a couple weeks and the Wolves won the series, what's that quote unquote X factor or element that went right for the Wolves to you, Jack?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of cheating by saying this because there's, I think a few different elements that go into this overarching stat that I want to get to, but I think it's just the field goal attempt differential. I think when you're going up against a team that has Luka Doncic and LeBron James, two of probably the 10 greatest, ball handling, playmaking guards to ever play the game, probably two of the 10 smartest guys to ever play the game. you've got to be able to create extra possessions for yourself to be able to get extra cracks at it, because you know that they have this built-in offensive advantage as is, because when you give those two guys that much time to prepare for one opponent that has their schemes, they're going to be ready to go and know what they have to do. So I think for the Wolves, I mean, the Lakers on the season, they're fifth worst in the NBA in terms of the field goal attempt differential on a per game basis. So they're giving opponents 4 extra shots a game. And the primary reasons are 2 areas that the Timberwolves have largely done a good job of taking advantage of. And the Lakers have had the 6th worst turnover rate in the NBA since Luka Doncic debuted for them in February. They've allowed the 5th most opponent fast break points, about 18 a game. And they're 18th in opponent points off turnovers, about 17 a game since Luka came on board. So I think, look, Luka Doncic is a basketball genius, but he's going to make mistakes. There are going to be possessions that he just gives up on, or throws a ill-advised pass, or tries to get a little too fancy to inject some life into the game. And it's just, you've got to take advantage of those. And then on the offensive glass, I mean, Lakers are bottom 10 in defensive rebound percentage, and they're 17th in opponent second chance points per game at about 15 a game. So I think the Timberwolves really need to take advantage of scoring off of turnovers and really living on the offensive glass. I think that's going to be a key way that Rudy Gobert stays on the floor as well. I mean, he's been just dominant on the offensive glass the last, really since he's come back from injury. And they need to do both those things really well, because that the Lakers are going to do really well in the free throw attempt game. And this is not Lakers refs. No, the Lakers have 4 guys who are insanely physical and awesome at driving the basketball, between Luka, LeBron, Austin Reeves, and Rui Hachimura, that draw a ton of free throws, and they earn a bunch of free throws because they put you in jail and compromise positions and take advantage of you. And so I think if the Wolves can just score off of turnovers, get offensive rebounds, and try their hardest to defend without fouling on the drive, I think that's it. I don't think it's like Ant goes superhuman or Julius Randle does this or that. I think it's more just those team elements that I think are going to require everybody to play super well, because if it comes into just this, star battle, the Lakers are probably going to win that, because they've got, like we've said, have probably 3 of the 4 best players in the series.
Yeah. One of the things I mentioned on would have been Wednesday's show is each team can be really good at what the other team struggles the most at. And in all the things you just listed about the Lakers turning the ball over. And, we talked earlier about their struggles with transition defense at times, defensive rebounding against a team that's been very focused on offensive rebounding in Minnesota for the last 3 months. I think those are all areas to exactly your point. Actually, I said to the Locked On Lakers guys toward the end, my kind of in summary was, look, if the Wolves can make this into more of a high variance game I didn't use the words generate more possessions, but I said high variance, play faster, give themselves more opportunities, all kind of the same thing in all the ways you listed. I do think that's kind of the path to winning this series, for all the reasons you just stated. I think that makes a lot of sense. On the flip side, and I basically would say the same thing. I think it is and I think I said this right before we started recording, but I also think another thing to keep an eye on, and it feels lazy to just say a playoff series hinges on if role players can make threes, because I think we could always say that, but it really feels that way. There were some Wolves losses, especially over the last 2 to 3 months when the Wolves won 17 out of 21. A couple of those losses in there were just they just missed some shots. And sometimes that's the deal. And in a playoff series, every shot is magnified, and you can rewind and look at any individual shot in a game, down the stretch that somebody missed a corner 3. And I think it's, when the ball swung to Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the corner, or Jaden McDaniels in the corner, or Naz Reid, are these guys going to hit their open threes? And that there's going to be a game or two that kind of hinges on that. And that's a huge question. And thankfully, those, and Dante DiVincenzo, those are all guys who are, I guess, minus Jaden, but are above average 3-point shooters. So, I like the Wolves' chances overall when it comes to that. On the flip side, what is it for you with the Lakers? I mean, we already kind of said they've got the star power, but is there anything else besides just Luka being Luka? Is it Austin Reeves going superhuman, or anything individually that you think is something that could happen that would maybe it's helped the Lakers win this series in like less than 6 or 7 games? I mean, what would have to happen for the Lakers to be that successful against the Wolves in your mind?
It's funny that you talk about role players making shots, and my mind just went to, I think the Timberwolves will live with the results if they're able to force as many shots as they can to Hachimura,
Yeah.
Finney Smith, and Gabe Vincent, just as they did last year against the Mavericks with, PJ Washington and Derek Jones Jr. I think it's a very similar type of thing. And, those three guys, when they, from 3 this season, they are 81 of 242, 33.5% in losses, and they are 212 for 520, 41% in wins. So I think, you've got to effectively close out on those guys, and you've got to force them to play below the arc. And I think the more that you can force, Finney Smith to then make cross-court kickout passes and still be able to, close out effectively. And then with Vincent, I think if you can make Vincent and Rui Hachimura play below the arc and force them into mid-range jump shots instead of those, threes, I think that's going to be really important, because we've seen that this Timberwolves team is really, really good at defending mid-range shots and forcing misses off of those. And, the most efficient offense going the other way, turnovers are obviously number one, but missed layups and missed mid-range shots are right there behind them and generating the most efficient offensive possessions going back the other way. So I think that's going to be super important. But I think if all three of those guys are making 3-point shots, there's just not a whole lot that the Timberwolves are going to be able to do, right? Because I think that, you'd fully expect that Luka Doncic is going to maybe have 1 or 2 games where he goes, 5 of 18 or 8 of 26 or whatever it is, and has a relatively inefficient game, or that, LeBron just isn't making his shots, or Austin Reeves, maybe they make an adjustment so that, Jaden's guarding him or something like that. But if those three guys are hitting, then it's tough. And I think too, the other part of it that I could see being problematic with those guys playing in that small ball lineup is if they're just able to whip the ball around the perimeter and move it really fast and drive the gaps and force the Wolves into rotation, and the Wolves are just too slow on the perimeter, and that forces the Wolves to go small from a defensive perspective rather than an offensive perspective, just to get more speed on the floor, then I think that would also be problematic for the Timberwolves too. So I think it kind of works in a few different ways. But yeah, I do think that, how well the Timberwolves are able to effectively kind of defend the 2 different trios that the Lakers have that comprise the top 6 of the rotation is going to be ultimately what determines the series on that end of the floor.
Yeah, and back to kind of where we started. I mean, you were talking about the Lakers role players and their struggles in games, at least outside the arc, in games that the Lakers lost this year. I mean, you list those 3-4 guys, and then the Wolves, the Wolves bench trio of Naz, Dante, and Nikhil. The Wolves have arguably the best bench trio in the NBA. Like, I'd stack those guys up against anybody. And so you like the Wolves odds if it does come down to that. But still, Luka is Luka. It's like they've got the best player. They've got 3 of the best 4. And then if it comes down to, and that's, it just is going to be a really closely contested series, very likely. What any final words? We could do predictions, or anything you want to leave the listeners with about this series.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually just ran the same numbers for Dante, Naz, and Nikhil. Dante, Naz, and Nikhil in losses, 37.6%, and in wins, 39.3%. So not a huge jump. It's a little more stark for LA, but yeah, I think, my most important thing for the Timberwolves is just going to be, can they move the ball? I think if the Timberwolves move the ball, they don't get bogged down against a really good shell concept, and they play off the catch quickly and decisively, like you talked about. I think that's going to be the most important thing, because I think that's when the Timberwolves have played their best basketball. And I trust that the Timberwolves defense is going to play really hard. And if they get carved up, it's mostly just going to be because LA is making a ton of their threes. But I just think that this series hinges upon how well the Timberwolves move the ball, kind of play and adopt that 0.5 mentality that we've seen Naz and Dante and even Jaden at times this year kind of be the poster children for. So it's going to be super important for me. But yeah, I'm ready to give a prediction. I don't know if you're holding that in, but
I had to do it on the crossover yesterday, so I did give a prediction, but I reserve the right. I guess this is Friday's show, so I guess this has to be this is kind of my last shot to put it out there. So, yeah, what do you what do you have? What do you think's gonna happen?
Yeah, I think the Timberwolves will steal one in LA, and then I think that they'll probably split the games in Minneapolis, and then I think each of the home teams will get it done from there on in. So I think the Lakers will win in 7. I just think that between Luka and LeBron having 2 games, they have 2 days of rest in between games 1 and 2, games 2 and 3, and games 4 and 5. So, it's just it's kind of an ideal situation if you're a Lakers fan in terms of, getting up, what's he, 40 years old? It's just absolutely mind-boggling to remind myself that LeBron James is 40 years old and still doing this thing. But
sorry, we were talking about that with the Lakers guys about they said something about the Lakers haven't hosted a playoff series or haven't opened at home in the playoffs since 2012. And I was like, it doesn't sound that bad. You're talking, this is going to be a Wolves audience that's hearing this. Like that, obviously the Wolves have been since then. And then they said the last time that Wolves and Lakers, I guess, opened in, well, I guess they played as a play-in though a couple years ago was the 2004. And then we kind of came back to, wait, that was LeBron's rookie year. Like, how crazy is that was the conference finals in 2004 was LeBron's rookie season with Cleveland.
Yeah, but the one thing that I will say, though, that as someone who is a huge LeBron fan and is very excited at the prospect of being able to see LeBron James up close in person, is I just hope that that groin doesn't flare back up as he re-injured that allegedly in the second to last game of the year for them. So we'll see. But I will be in LA for games 1 and 2. So I'm excited to see what that playoff reception will be for Luka and his home playoff debut.
And you'll have us covered on the postcast live in LA. My prediction, as I mentioned yesterday on the crossover episode, I do have Lakers in 6. And I'll say that a year ago, I did the crossover episode with Locked On Suns, and Brendan Clean predicted the Suns in 5, which I wasn't much better. I said Suns in 6. So this is a I guess an attempt at a reverse jinx, but I agree that each team will split, the 2 in LA, 2 in Minnesota. Then I think that perhaps the Wolves' inability to defend home court in the regular season may come back to haunt them a little bit in the playoffs. And for whatever reason that might be. And I think Lakers in 6, but I hope I'm wrong. I was wrong last year. And then I think I picked Wolves in 7 in the second round. I'd have to go back and look, but I know I picked 7 games. So hopefully my first round track record remains the same in terms of picking. But Jack, thanks for doing this. Jack will be on the postcast following each game of the series and live from LA following games 1 and 2 with Luke Inman. Again, you can watch that over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube immediately following the games live. And then if you miss it live, you can listen to the audio at Locked On Wolves. Wherever you listen to your podcast, you can find Locked On Wolves and the postcast on that feed as well. Appreciate you coming on, Jack.
Appreciate you having me.
All right, there you have it. Thanks to Jack Borman for coming on the show and discussing Wolves Lakers. Lots to break down in this series, of course, and been doing it all week. So if you missed any of the shows, some different takes on the matchup that I had on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the crossover episode with Locked On Lakers that I mentioned a couple of times in my conversation with Jack. And of course, tomorrow night, Saturday night, after Wolves Lakers tips 7:30 p.m. Central on ABC. And Jack will go live with Luke Inman. Jack's going to be in LA. And so check that out over at Locked On Sports Minnesota and YouTube. And then also the audio feed. Actually, the next episode in your feed after this one will be the postcast with Luke and Jack tomorrow night. And then, of course, they'll do the same thing next Tuesday. We'll look to have Jack back on possibly next week. And if the Wolves advance, certainly in between the first and second rounds of the playoffs. So lots upcoming here in the next several days. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder that while the Wolves are ready for playoff basketball, of course, Locked On Wolves has you covered every step of the way. And not just the podcast, you can also subscribe to the Locked On Wolves podcast newsletter for expert analysis, insider insights, and all the playoff action delivered straight to your email inbox for free. And as a subscriber, you will be entered to win one of these 3 amazing prizes. Get ready. $2,500 Best Buy gift card to upgrade your Sports Cave setup, a $300 gift card from our friends at Game Time, and also a $200 Fanatics gift card. As a subscriber, you're entered to win. It's super easy and free to enter. Just simply subscribe to the newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com between now and the end of the month, April 30th, to be automatically entered to win. Don't miss a moment of the Wolves championship run. Join Locked On Wolves and the newsletter every day. Join today and enjoy it every day, Monday through Friday, and experience the playoffs like never before. Subscribe today and enter to win by clicking the link in the description of today's show. Of course, Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast. We'll catch you next time. Enjoy playoff Wolves basketball.